Doesn't really make me mad.
Yeah, maybe it helps for sure. Well, cool. Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. If I touch this thing in the wrong place, it jumps all over the place, so I have to be really careful.
You know, Greg, it's funny how your internet works better than anybody else's.
Well, I'm paying $50 a month for it. I got River Canyon Wireless.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm on Emory, but I've got their, their biggest plan.
Yeah.
So I'm commercial. So.
Yeah. The people that are having trouble have got the bargain basement deal.
Yeah. I would think out in Casa Valley, you'd have to have something, that's better,
Are these yours?
Well, I could have had a cheaper deal, but I didn't.
Yeah. Probably wouldn't work very good.
No, it'd be stopping and all that garbage we have with these other ones. Well, we had a couple of base jumpers get hurt. Locals. God, I can't figure them out.
I don't know if they're local or if they're just moving crazies.
Yeah, it could be. One guy jumped off a cliff and hit the cliff wall. Bounced off the cliff.
Yeah, I guess none of the locals I hang out with would do that. That's crazy.
I'm not aware of any old base jumpers.
Yeah. There's a reason for that.
I think so. There may be young and brave and daring base jumpers, but there aren't any old, sodded base jumpers. Well, I haven't been doing it very long anyway, so. We got anybody else out there? Looks like Evan's there. Evan's outside. Well, there's somebody. Better put the specs on so I can see who it is.
Hey guys, it's Dylan Cole.
Oh, there we go. It's from the
All
hospital.
right, Greg.
What?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, good. In that case, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
you
mute it.
got, have you got your
Hello,
thumb
Chris,
ready?
Can you hear me?
You got,
Yeah.
you got your thumb ready for yes? Okay.
Coming through?
Sounds like Mary trying to break in.
Okay.
I'm having to run two computers at the same time. I put all the print stuff on on mine so I can read it. And then I use the counties to look at you guys. So we're not doing a meeting next week?
No, this one's gonna be in place of that.
Okay,
Tara's gonna be leaving, so the office is gonna have less people there with the furloughs.
okay.
Got to get all the business done today so that we're not creating more work for them.
Sounds good.
The only council person that's not with us is Jay Lynn, correct?
I don't know, is Kurt here?
Yes, he is.
Okay. I miss doing the Pledge of Allegiance, so
Do you got a flag behind you? You could.
yeah, I got one right over there.
Chair, it sounds like we have a request for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I need one of those little bitty ones, you know, that fit on a table.
I think it's a great idea, Greg.
Yeah,
So I will open this. Evan or someone, if I start cutting out, would you somehow let me know so I can turn off my camera? Am I okay right now?
you're okay right now.
Okay. Let's see how long it lasts. I will call to order this Grand County Council emergency meeting. It is Thursday, April 30th, 2020. The time is 3:02. We will begin with citizens to be heard. Are there any citizens to be heard? Chris, are there any citizens to be heard?
No, there's nobody. There's nobody in the waiting room.
Okay. Approval of minutes. Approval of the minutes for April 21st, 2020. Can I have a motion?
I'll give a motion.
Oh, hello, Jaylen.
Hi.
Do you know what okay, let's announce all the council people that are here.
There I am.
Present at the meeting are Mary McGann, Greg Halliday, Evan Clapper, Rory Paxman, Gabriel Wojtek, Jaylen Hawks, and myself, Mary McGann. So we have a full
What about Kurt?
council with us. Kurt, where is Kurt? I don't see him. Kurt, are you still there? Is he still there? Does anybody have him?
I
Oh,
don't.
here he is. Kurt.
He's in there.
Right here. His name is
Is there?
Curtis Wells. Curtis Wells. I see his name. Okay, so everyone is here. Our Quinn Hall, our clerk auditor, Chris Baird, county administrator, Jan Sadoff, Brandon Bradford, and
It's
Oren
working.
Rogers, Mallory Nasu. Okay, so, and Kay Johnson. Not sure who that is. Okay. Approval of minutes. I had a motion from Jaylen. Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Second by Greg Halliday. Discussion.
Nothing from me.
Nothing from me.
Okay, roll call vote. Greg Halliday? Evan Clapper?
Yes.
Rory Paxman, you're on mute.
Yes.
Gabriel Wojtek?
Yes.
Chris Wells? Jalen Hawks?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. 6, Curtis Wells, not available. Okay, council member disclosures. Greg Halliday, do you have any disclosures? You're on mute.
Nothing, ma'am.
Evan Clapper?
Nothing pertaining to this agenda besides the fact that I operate a tourist-based business.
Rory Paxman? You're on mute. You're still on.
Sorry
mute.
about that. Yeah, own hotel and a local business, and I also have a BLM permit,
Thank you.
a national park pass.
Gabriel Wojtek?
There on the agenda item with regards to the findings of the Board of Equalization, specifically pertaining to the application request by Moab Community Rebuilds, due to my employer, one of my employers, the Youth Garden Project, being having a partnership with one of the properties on said application. I'll be recusing myself from discussion and voting on that item.
Thank you, Gabriel. Curtis Wells? Jalen Hawks?
Yes, I'll disclose that I also operate a tourism-based business, co-owner of it.
Mary McCann, for this agenda, I do not have anything to disclose. This moves us to our presentations. I will turn the time over to Dr. Dylan Cole, Chief Medical Officer, and Jen Sadoff, CEO, Moab Regional. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We presented the other day to the City Council, and Brady went first, and I think that was helpful to sort of get the background from the health department and then sort of the hospital to talk about that. May I?
I would entertain a motion to move the presentation from the health department to B, and do I have a motion? Evan Clapper?
So moved.
Second.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have a second by Curtis Wells? All in favor, raise your hand.
Yes.
That's
easier.
Sorry.
Everyone, so no, don't worry. That's it. If that helps, we want the best time, use of our time. So motion passes 7-0. We will turn the time over to Oren and Brady.
So Jen, now you have to remind me what I said. It all seems to blend together now. I'd like to thank the council for providing time for us to talk about some of the thoughts and processes that have led us to this point. And it does seem to go hand in hand. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions at the end. It seemed to work very well when after I went, the hospital went and cleared up some of those lingering questions, and then can continue from there. But as you know, we have a very small case load burden of COVID-19 in our area in each of our individual counties. Right now, Grand County has 3 positive cases, one of which was not residing in the county when they were infected. From a health department standpoint, we have been very active in receiving PPE from the state and distributing that to all of our healthcare partners. It includes the hospital, it includes long-term care facilities as well, and home health care as part of that. We've distributed quite a lot of PPE in the last 10 days, and additionally have more PPE that we have the possibility to distribute for all of our healthcare partners that need that. Now, regarding kind of what is proposed, I'll give you a little bit of background. We felt like, as a health department, as we had conversations with community leaders, with the hospital, we were headed to a place where we were going to start easing restrictions anyway. That started to take place with our last orders. We addressed beauty parlors, nail parlors, and the like. Those businesses we thought mostly catered to locals. But we did look to be heading to a place to open somewhat the tourism industries in the area before the creation of the Public Health and Economic Emergency Commission. Once that became a reality, we knew that we needed to submit what we felt was necessary in order to protect the immediate needs of Grand County residents and visitors as Utah started to roll out their plan to reopen business. That was submitted to them about 8 days ago, and it included the most of what you see in the final prepared proposed order. Last night at about 5 o'clock, I received word back that they had accepted most of our recommendations, but not all of them. One of those recommendations was to have 72 hours between occupied rooms, and they bumped that down to 24 hours. That was their main recommendation or requirement. Additionally, we had language in the proposed order for mandatory face coverings in public, and the governor has been very adamant that it can be mandatory for employees of businesses, but it is not to be mandatory for public. It's just a strong recommendation. And so that wording changed in the order. But a lot of this comes down to the fact that now we
You muted, Brayden, you muted.
Oh, sorry, I don't know. I'll move off of that. We get to this point by having more data and being more prepared to deal with infection. We were just on a Board of Health meeting, and one of our board members said, and it's been a message we've tried to convey, we have never realistically speaking, we've never tried to eliminate disease transmission. It's been about flattening the curve. And so we do expect disease transmission to continue. And the hospital will talk some about their preparedness, but from a health department level, our employees are well-versed now in contact tracing, and we have backups at the state level that have been trained if we were to become overwhelmed for whatever reason. Gabriel asked about measures that we might look at to transition between orange and yellow, or orange back to red. And I'll just mention a few of those. Some of those will be published on the coronavirus.utah.gov website soon. We thought we would see them yesterday, but now we're told maybe it's more likely to be tomorrow. And I've mentioned some of these before, but transmission rate is hovering just above 1 now, but between 1.1 and 1.2 people are infected per COVID positive case, whereas it was up around 3 at the start of this, about 6-7 weeks ago. Hospital utilization rate and ICU utilization rate, both of those numbers, as we collect, the state is collecting data. They're getting data from 48 of the 49 hospitals in the state, and indicates that hospitals have availability right now. Again, contact tracing availability is one of those numbers. And we will look very closely locally about what is the percent of positive cases that comes back that are tested locally. All of those things in conjunction will help to form decisions that will then have to be requested to the governor, essentially, to move either forward or back along the scale. I've probably talked enough at this point, and we'll turn the time over to the hospital, and then happy to answer questions as we move forward.
Brady.
Before we move to the hospital, I'd like to hear, are there any questions from our council members to Brandon? Does anybody have questions? Jaylyn?
I've got one. On those measures for transitioning either to a higher risk category or a lower risk, are those, I'm assuming that will be measured at both the state level and the local level, and which one? I'm assuming the state level takes precedence.
In this case, actually, we'll have the ability to really make an argument for local numbers. They are all the data I have access to. I can break it down at least to a county level. Some of it can be a small area level. Of course, in rural Utah, our small areas are generally an entire county. So the state numbers will have an impact on what's going on, but we will be able to make a reasoned argument about what's happening locally.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Yes,
I
Curtis.
would like to.
Curtis?
Are there any elements of the red line order that we're looking at today that you see that are at risk for, you know, the state commission and the state authorities that you're working with to not approve of? So I understand they took the 72-hour window between bookings down to 24 hours. There was some talk about the date from May 4th to May 1st, but do you see any soft spots in this order that if we approve it as is today, may be amended by the state or challenged? Or
No, everything that's in the proposed order today would be accepted at least through the 15th. And then they would look at elements beyond that. So today's proposed order goes to the 29th, but in reality, anything we would want to continue past the 15th, we would propose to the commission again, and they would have the opportunity to accept or amend those elements.
thank you.
And I have a question. So they're going to relook at it in 2 weeks as opposed to the end of the month?
Yes, the governor's executive order that was issued today is effective through May 15th. And so as he's worded, or as they've worded it, anything that varies from that has to receive an official approval.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Evan, and then I got another question.
Evan, who else had a question?
I did have some questions, but I was gonna wait till we hear from the hospital. So I was just making sure that we would have the opportunity to come back and ask some questions of the health department before moving on.
So Braden, you're going to stay with us, right, through the presentation from the hospital?
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay, so yes. Curtis, did you have another question?
Yeah, so as we move closer to that May 15th timeline, a lot of the questions that I'm getting are related to the occupancy limits. Do you have anything to add as far as any potential changes to occupancy between May 15th, or I'm sorry, between now and then after May 15th, if there's any amendments to the order?
I think frankly, most of our time now up to this point has just been getting this in place as something we feel like, you know, we can't ever claim anything is perfect, but is a reasonable step in the right direction and gives the community and healthcare a time to understand if, you know, how the influx of visitors will impact the community, impact healthcare systems. There is the potential to further adjust that. Right now, we don't have any sort of proposed numbers. I would envision continuing that work group that was established that helped to come up with the outline that we've put out here, and then pay attention to those metrics that I talked about to see if that is something that we can implement. And yeah, that's kind of a roundabout, not concrete answer, but this haven't really had time to look beyond this step, but I would anticipate starting that process tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, I think more specifically, I was just wondering how much of a rub, if any, that was with the state.
There are elements that they brought up. They did talk about camping on public lands. They mentioned potentially, you know, after 14 days, just moving hotels to, I guess we would consider the larger hotels to 50% occupancy. Those were two discussion points that we had yesterday, but neither of them were do this now, but something to keep in mind.
Thanks, Braden.
Is there any other questions? Okay, we'll move to the hospital.
All right, thank you all so much for having us. Dr. Cole and I will probably be tag teaming this a little bit. We've been asked by a lot of people if we're in support of the health department's move to open business, and we want to say that we are in support. We think that they've made a very thoughtful effort to try and take slow steps forward. We also know that there is a balance between our reopening our economy and the health of our community. So this isn't just all about protecting our community from COVID. It's about finding a balance between protecting our community's health in general. So we think it's important that we start taking steps to move forward in that. The main things that make us feel a lot more comfortable on taking steps forward have to do with the progress that we've made in the hospital over the last 6 weeks, as well as the progress that's been made in other regional hospitals. So when this started and we closed the community down to tourism, we didn't have a significant amount of testing. Even people who were symptomatic weren't being tested at that time. So we've come a long way in testing. The symptoms that you can get tested for now have expanded greatly. And the basically anybody not feeling, totally 100% can get tested at this point in time. But it's so that's really changed. We've also made significant advancements within our hospital facilities. We went from having 3 rooms with negative pressure to now having about 23 spaces that we could place patients with COVID that are negative pressure spaces. And we have a plan in place to approximately double that ability to care for patients in a barrack style setting. We feel really good about the health department's assurance that they can do good contact tracing. And we are putting into place a program starting, it started internally already and will be moving out into the community next week to test asymptomatic cases. And Dr. Cole can speak a little bit more to that. The program is, he's been working with the health department closely to develop it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come back and talk to you guys some more about the what's changed over the last 4 to 6 weeks. And I agree. My first comments would be, the hope to say that maybe the decision to reopen, it's sort of it's one of those times where there sort of is no perfect decision, where there's risks on both sides. We're acutely aware of the risks and the costs to the community from an economic standpoint and also from a health and well-being standpoint to maintaining shutdown. We feel, and what I personally feel, is that the preparation that we've been able to achieve over the last month and the last 6 weeks is we feel to a level much better about the degree of preparation, and we feel like there is additional time wouldn't earn us anything better in that sense. In other words, whether you open now or you open in 1 month or 2 months, our level of preparation would probably be about where it is now. So that's, to me, that's an underpinning. And then the question becomes, for the last 6 weeks around, locally and around the country as a whole, wholesale widespread shutdown has been kind of the cornerstone of disease control and mitigation. And so what do we replace that with as we go forward? If we're going to relax on some of those rules, then what do we replace that with? And I think if you're paying attention, just anyone paying attention to the national conversation on that, or to the conversation at all levels, it's the idea is that we need to replace the shutdown with widespread testing in order to identify early and readily and widely the positive cases, in order to allow our public health workers to do the legwork of contact tracing, of testing among contacts, and also in order to, because of the particular nuance of this disease and how it can transmit among minimally symptomatic or asymptomatic people, how do we test among those at high risk, even when asymptomatic? So the cornerstones of our approach here with regard to testing, the hospital and the health department have released a sort of a joint statement on what is the strategy of testing, and it is focused on testing widely among symptomatic people, so that the list of symptoms is now about a dozen symptoms long, including the fever, cough, and shortness of breath, but also including a variety of other symptoms like sore throat and headache and a loss of smell or taste, etc. And really anyone experiencing at least one of those symptoms, even if mild, we're encouraging to be tested. The success of our ability to continue to mitigate against a large surge in community transmission will be in part based on the community's participation in testing if they are showing symptoms, so that we can identify cases and hotspots early and quickly and take the appropriate actions. And as well, within the contacts of positive cases, the health department will be focused on appropriate quarantine of those people, but also testing within those groups to identify positives as they arise. And then finally, this concept that we plan to test asymptomatic screening within workers that are at a high risk in terms of areas with a high degree of interaction with the public. So in healthcare, in employees of long-term care facilities or first responders, as well as in areas like convenience stores, grocery stores, and other areas with a high degree of interaction with the public. So we do have the details of that program worked out in terms of how that'll work. And in the next days, the liaison officer of the hospital will be reaching out to those employers to begin those types of asymptomatic screening. And we hope that'll be a screening program that will roll on a periodic basis, so that each week we're sampling among those areas at highest risk of exposure. That should also serve to give us an early warning sign. Brady mentioned, watching our test positivity ratios, or the percentage of all tests that we do that come back positive. In terms of the data that we have here locally, right now, our test positivity ratio, we've tested over 400 people with results and only 3 positive. And in terms of the contact tracing and testing among those groups, there still is not evidence of widespread community transmission. But once we see if we start seeing those test positivity rates shooting up quickly, that will be one of the early indicators that we're starting to see that, even before we may identify a wide degree of people with symptoms.
Dr. Cole, I just want to point out too that a lot of people have been confused about asymptomatic testing that we're hoping to do with employers. People who are tested and don't have symptoms do not need to quarantine until their test results come back. And that's been, there's been some confusion regarding that, so we want to clear that up. The other, I think, big request from the hospital, and really a request on behalf of Moab, is that if we want to keep our community open, if keeping rolling towards further reopening to this community, they will take seriously wearing face coverings when out in public. This is an opportunity for our community to work together to keep our economy open by keeping down the transmission rate, and face coverings will help do that. For some people, it feels like it's not a cultural norm that they're comfortable with. But we want to encourage that basically, if you're wearing a face covering in public, you are pro Moab continuing to open, because you're helping to make sure that transmission rate stays down. I'm trying to just look really quick and see if there are any points that I missed.
Dr. Cole or Jenny, how long is the present testing take from being tested to get the results? Has that changed?
Good question. We still do not have a large number of point of care tests that with results immediately. So the test results still do take on average about 2 to 3 days to come back.
So the asymptomatic people will not be quarantined if they're tested, but if you come in with one or more symptoms to be tested, then you would be quarantined until your test came back. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct. Individuals that have symptoms would be asked to isolate while they are awaiting their test result, to avoid spreading the to avoid further spread. But those who would be screened asymptomatically because they work in a place of employment with a higher risk would not be asked to quarantine while their test results are out.
And Mary, one part of our messaging that goes out with the test results is that a negative test result is not a assurance that you are negative for COVID-19. And so the actual message is that if you have symptoms of COVID-19, since we are past flu season, you quarantine until your symptoms are gone and if you're fever free for 72 hours. So the test result is nice, you know where you stand, but if you're sick, you really need to be staying home and staying out of the public.
What is the update on the antibody test?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. So I've spoken a little bit before about the antibody test. It's a valuable tool from a public health standpoint. It's a tool that is the way that this test works is it's a blood draw, and it looks for immune system reaction to show evidence that the individual has had prior exposure to COVID-19. The WHO, just within this last week, did release a statement, and there is as of yet no scientific evidence to show that people who have positive antibodies and who may have been exposed necessarily have immunity. So from an individual point of view, in terms of someone using an antibody test and potentially a positive antibody result to stop following social distancing guidelines or to feel that they have somehow an immunity pass, we do not recommend at this time at all. There are issues and questions scientifically around whether antibodies will confer that kind of immunity. And then there's also, with any given antibody test, there is also some rate of false positives. So an antibody test can show positive mistakenly when in fact that person has not been exposed. One of the reasons for that is that these antibodies sometimes will react with other coronavirus illnesses that circulate and cause things like the common cold. So we also have information going out with test results for both the PCR tests or the test for active illness, as well as the antibody test that explains that to people to try to make sure individuals understand what it is and isn't safe to conclude from their own test results. The value of the antibody test, and I should say that we are offering the antibody tests through the hospital to anyone in the community that can come in and have those tests done. We also are screening those high-risk groups that I mentioned earlier with both the PCR test for acute infection as well as with the antibody test. And the value of the antibody tests is really more of a public health value for us to be able to monitor prevalence of this illness over time. And really when we look forward to be able to, make informed public health decisions based on the degree or the number or the percentage of the community that may have been exposed and recovered. We fully expect that there's a lot of research going on into what antibodies mean and whether they may or may not provide immunity. But at this point, we cannot say that.
Locally in Utah, they're starting an antibody test study, in Summit County. So we will gain a little bit of more local knowledge about that. And they're really so far the only county with a high enough rate to draw inferences from. So that'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
Can I roll it back a question and just ask again how transmission rate is calculated and how the transfer availability rate is calculated?
Do you want to take that, Brady, or do you want me to talk to it?
You start and I'll finish.
I mean, transmission rate comes back to that concept of the, we called it early on, we called it the R naught, or the effective, the kind of effective transmission rate. For every given positive case, how many people does that individual infect? So the more that we do in terms of social distancing, and it should go without saying at this point, but I'm going to say it anyways, that even as we start to see an increase in visitation and in tourism and in economic activity, kind of the cornerstones of our community-wide strategy to keep that transmission rate low are, the same principles of hand hygiene, washing hands frequently, keeping physical distance 6 feet from other people, masks, etc. But yeah, it's a measure of how many people are infected, and we just watch that by the numbers.
So I guess my question is, what are those numbers? If we're talking about a 1.1 rate or a 1.2 rate, like how are I don't know how those numbers are calculated, and that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it comes back to the epidemiology work we do in being able to, so there's a statewide database where we enter every positive case and we enter their contacts and those that end up negative and those that end up positive. And so a lot of it has to do with, if we have a defined contact and they both end up positive, that ends up in the denominator or the numerator, depending on, what we're talking about. But it's a very robust database that every single, well, I don't know about every single, but virtually every test that's been done in Utah is entered into the database. And then all of the investigations are in there as well. And so they connect all of those dots essentially for those, if I were to test positive and I have one person in my family and one person that I played tennis with or something, I don't know. I would have our own personal R naught of 2. And so the compilation of all that data is what we're looking at. And so we are able to fine tune that a little bit more for Grand County with the investigations that we've done.
And Brady, that 1.1 or 1.2 number, that was for southeastern Utah, or that was for Utah as a whole?
That's for Utah as a whole. We don't, at the moment, really have enough cases to calculate anything for Southeast Utah.
And so for citizens that are looking for a hard line on evaluating, the safety of our reopening being a success or a failure, is there a hard red line that we're going to be utilizing?
I need to actually wait a little bit until the commission publishes their metrics, because I have received information that they have defined what they consider to be success or failure in each stage, but I don't know what that is. And right now, they are kind of driving that decision-making process. So I don't know what it is yet, but
when you say they, that's the Public Health and Emergency Economic Commission?
Yes.
Okay, and that was just formed with the emergency legislative session?
Correct.
Okay. And so I'm hearing you say they're kind of making the calls on what's acceptable health-wise, or?
They're going to establish some initial baselines, I believe, and then and they do have people advising them that this is professionals, but frankly I haven't seen anything coming out of there yet, so I don't know really how to guide my response to you, except to talk about those general things that we do see.
Well, I think as elected representatives, we're getting grilled a lot about, what the acceptable limits are. And a lot of people are framing it through, the number of cases or numbers of deaths. And, but, with our talk earlier about proposals being overruled and such, I'm curious how much of this actually plays into the decisions that the Health and Economic Commission is making.
That is something we'll continue to explore as we move forward. But I don't, certainly that we have lost, I guess, some element of direct ability to influence the policies that are taking place over the next little while. But I certainly don't want to give the impression that they're going to ignore completely what's happening in Southeast Utah. We are going to be in constant communication with them. If we see any of these start to rise, we're going to talk to them, to the State Department of Health, and start to and determine why we think that is happening. And so we're not going to be ignored.
Sure. No, and I hope that's the case. And I think that we all realize that by just increasing the number of people moving in and out of our region, that those transmission rates and the transferability rates are going to increase. I mean, that's a reasonable expectation to have, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would.
And so I guess we're kind of like, there's a big question mark of like, of how much is too much. And I hear you saying that you don't have the answer today. And, I hope that that's something that as these discussions move forward, that we can try to establish kind of a red line where, if we're going to be transitioning from orange to yellow, that there's also some metrics to transition from orange back to red if necessary. Because I think a lot of businesses are worried that, opening too soon might result in an additional closure later, which just kind of backs us up more and possibly a loss of like the fall economic season as well. So,
and we've heard that, and we do know that those parameters will be established on both sides of the scale for opening more or closing it down. And I think we all understand that we'd rather not retract, not only for public health reasons, but for stability and economic reasons. But those parameters will be in place. I apologize that I don't have concrete.
I understand it's out of your hands.
Yeah,
so
right.
I don't want to put you on the hot spot too much.
Evan, to speak to your question regarding transfer availability, we are meeting every single week with all of the hospitals on the Wasatch Front, all of the hospitals on the western slope of Colorado, and we track the data on hospitalizations really closely. The hospitals are working on metrics as well that we can use in order to determine it's time to ring an alarm bell to the health department. And so that's important. The other piece that I just can't reiterate enough to our community is that if we don't want to see the transmission rates really increase, we can't go as though everything is completely normal. We need to continue to social distance. We need to continue to wear face coverings in public. And that will help with that process. Dr. Cole's like, shut it, but it's true. And so that's essentially at this time, that's the only way that we won't slide back, is if we do that as a community. Now say it, Dr. Cole, so everybody will listen to it. Because when he says it, they listen.
Rory, did you have a question? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? So I've got 3 questions for the doctor and Brandon and Jen. I'll read them all off, and then so if you'll go through it, I think that'll be the easiest way to do it. But are you guys looking forward to what's going to happen in October? and then in the winter time when the flu starts to come back? And then how are our antibodies going to fight this if we don't let some of this just take place with people getting sick and so on and so forth? And then with the mask thing, I'm a little bit nervous about making it mandatory, or I'm really worried that people are going to be scrutinized and threatened if they don't wear a mask. So I just want to make sure that we're not spreading this mask thing that where it's going to be a problem.
To answer your question, no, we aren't looking forward at all to flu season and COVID season happening together, but we are planning for it. And in terms of, you know, people taking vigilante action against people not wearing masks, we would absolutely not promote that or recommend that or encourage that. We like to encourage compassion and caring. However, we do want to make the point that wearing a mask is not about protecting yourself, it's about protecting the others around you. And so at this point in time, so that we can keep our transmission rate low and open our economy, it's an important message to get out, and also as leaders in our community to model to other people that we want to keep Moab open, and that means keeping our transmission rates low. And, you know, it's like
my question with
signs, I've seen signs that say no shirt, no shoes, no service. It's a business's prerogative to say, in our facility, we want to help keep people safe, and we require masks.
So those people that are wearing masks, aren't they protecting themselves and against everybody else?
Well, there's Dr. Cole, you want to talk about mask protection?
Yeah, well, you know, it's true that the benefit of when you talk about a cloth, you know, facial covering, or even a basic procedural mask, the real benefit is in protecting those around you. It does a pretty darn good job of keeping those respiratory droplets that, if you cough or sneeze, would otherwise, you know, have the potential to land on surfaces and to linger in the, you know, to spread in the air around to those in close contact with you. It does a much less effective job. There's certainly some degree potentially of protection for the individual wearer, but this is really more about protecting those around you. And so, you know, again, I think the benefit of the masks is certainly most achieved if we get everybody on board, in particular using those in indoor places and in places where it's difficult to maintain those physical distances.
Can you explain the antibodies, how that will work? If I get sick, do the antibodies help? I mean, can you just, because a lot of people are asking me what's going to happen in October when nobody's gone and we've done all this and we don't have the antibody for in October.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that a little bit in terms of the seasonality of that question. First off, with this particular virus, it's not yet clear to us that we're going to see a significant or a large reduction in transmission in the summer months. That may happen to some degree, but the reason that illnesses like flu are seasonal is complex, and it may not all those factors may not fully apply in this case. So you know, certainly we could still see transmission, problematic levels of transmission in the summer. And it is spreading in areas which are experiencing their own hot and humid seasons. We are still seeing spread. So I first want to kind of dispel the myth, as I see it a little bit, that this is just going to go away entirely until the fall. I think it could still be, it's really important that we still try to take those mitigation steps for the upcoming months as well. And then back to that question of the antibodies, it it is certainly true that for a lot of illnesses, what an antibody is basically the proteins formed by the immune system in response to coming into contact with that infection. And for many infections and many viruses, those antibodies do help protect against future infection. But that's not always or exclusively the case, and we're still getting more data on how much an individual may be protected by those antibodies. Some people, for example, may form high levels, or what we call titers, high levels of antibodies that maintain some degree of protection. Other people may not, and may, it's certainly still possible. There have been some preliminary studies out of Wuhan that at least brought up the concern that people already shown to have antibodies may have been reinfected by the virus. And so I would say that it's just too early to know exactly how that's going to work yet. Our goal in all of this, and I would say that in my mind, the best answer to your question is that we ultimately we will see some degree of community transmission and spread of COVID. This is sort of the new normal. From a hospital standpoint, we are speaking to your questions around, this is going to be with us for a while. How are we preparing for next fall, next winter, next flu season? We're making a lot of operational changes right now that we expect will be the new normal in the way we guide our care here, for the next 18 months or 2 years, most likely, as this becomes just a part of what it is to practice medicine, and we have to take these extra precautions around the potential for disease spread in the hospital and that sort of thing. So it is the goal, or it is the understanding, that we will see community transmission. In the near term, our objective is still to keep the rate of that transmission slow, to keep the curve fairly flat, so that it doesn't become overwhelming. So those same principles that guided the decisions to shut down so that everyone could get prepared for this are still in place right now. Our goal is still to keep the disease transmission slow, not zero. We won't keep this out of Southeast Utah or Moab forever, but to keep the transmission rate, to keep the number of ill low enough that we're able to appropriately treat those that need it and get those people that need higher level care transferred to larger hospitals, so they can receive the best care they need. Brady, you might have some more comments to that.
Not a lot, just on a very practical level. We will strongly encourage flu shots as we approach the fall, so we can do whatever we can to reduce the confusion between COVID and influenza.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, thanks, Doctor.
Curtis?
Hey, this is a question for Brady, just really quickly. This is something that came up with the economic group as we were looking at, amendments to the order with Orion. And on page 3 of the order, under non-commercial camping, the first bullet point says, in Grand County, all campgrounds on public lands shall remain closed. My question for you is, I guess number one, if you could just quickly summarize or reference the authority you're using to impose that order, on federal property, and in addition to that, what is the dialogue, been like with the BLM or federal agencies? Because, granted, these are unique circumstances, and this isn't something that a lot of us have ever seen anything like this, but it does feel precedent setting to me as a policymaker, as I'm looking through these orders and these resolutions, and I see a lot of whereases that's, that more or less are saying, for the interest of Grand County, the citizens of Grand County, we're going to, more or less instruct the federal government to shut down public land to citizens outside of Grand County, which to me feels, very precedent setting, because the discussion in that realm that I've always been involved in has been the opposite. It's been an argument of local control and where are those lines drawn. And so we're kind of in a place where I'm not saying I disagree with it, but I'm curious to understand like how those discussions have gone and how have they been met with the federal agencies, because in writing and in legislation and as a community, largely the message we're sending is one of local control of the public lands within the boundaries of Grand County and this health department, district boundaries. And I find it interesting, and I'm wondering if you couldn't comment on that for me.
You want me to jump in, Brady, on the legal stuff?
Yeah, if you want to start the legal stuff, and then I'll hop in.
So we have jurisdiction over all lands in our county, absent an order or a law that conflicts with it. And so there is no federal law that conflicts with our local order. And therefore, we have jurisdiction to regulate camping on public lands. In addition to that, our local federal partners have been extremely supportive. They, and Brady can talk to this as well, but I've been engaging with them every day, multiple times a day. They don't have the capacity to open either. For example, the federal guideline for cleaning a toilet in a public campground right now is that they have to have, every single maintenance person has to have PPE for every single toilet they touch. So they have to come out of the toilet, they have to change their PPE, they have to put it back on, they go to the next toilet in the next campground. And we have many, many dozens of those. So they don't even have the capacity to meet federal COVID cleaning guidelines, for example. And there's other issues for them as well. Maintenance related, enforcement related. The Park Service is even more complicated, and their issues involves some funding for seasonal workers. It includes housing issues for seasonal workers because their federal guidelines require their bunk housing to have changed. So they've had issues with that. And then they have those same federal guidelines about cleaning campground toilets and all of that.
Hey, Chrissy, I got a question for you now based on that. This authority you're referencing, is that in relation to public health, or are you just speaking generally?
Generally.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Chrissy.
Yeah.
Hey, hold on. Let's let Braden speak on that.
So
it's not your floor, Paxman.
She did a great job answering that. I will say, in most cases, our federal partners have come to us asking for our recommendation and expressing their concerns with their lack of PPE and ability to meet the guidelines. So there has been a balance of a recommendation and them enacting that recommendation, so to speak. Certainly, I understand where you're coming from is in terms of precedent setting. It's an unprecedented situation, so you don't want to start something in an unprecedented situation that becomes a habit, so to speak. But
maybe we do.
Out to us.
Good.
One other thing I was going to talk to about your questions too, Curtis, and Dylan could jump in on this as well. But one of the other pieces of the camping closures is the increase in recreational injuries. And we want to make sure that the hospital can treat both COVID patients and our level of recreational injuries. The folks coming to camp in our public campgrounds are more likely to be involved in higher risk recreational opportunities that the Moab is famous for. That's why they're coming here. And so it's both about ensuring, again, in this slow opening, that we have the capacity to treat both of those at appropriate levels and keep those two groups of people safe from each other. So when you have recreational injuries and you have people with COVID in the same hospital, it requires a lot more PPE and safety precautions. And that's part of the camping closure as well.
I understand the logic, and I agree with the logic. It's an issue of access, and this component of this circumstance kind of falls in to, a pretty big debate that we don't need to get into right now. But I appreciate the opportunity to hear from you on this component specifically. So thank you.
Roy, did you have any questions?
I was waiting for Chair Curtis to let me talk.
Well, hey, if you
anyway,
recited Robert's rules, you got 10 minutes and you jumped in at 4. So read up, buddy.
Are you done? All right. So how come all the other parks are starting to open up, like Utah, the Dead Horse Point, Lake Powell, and Bryce Canyon are opening?
I don't know about Bryce Canyon. They have a different superintendent, of course. So I can only speak to what's happening in the Southeast Utah group and the conversation.
I was just wondering.
Yeah. Now,
that's all I had to say.
Dead Horse Point is a state park. And so the governor has mandated campgrounds and state parks be open. And there's a lot of confusion with the public, but it's actually in San Juan County. So it is open. Dead Horse State Park is open. And Kane County, I think, is a really interesting model. They've closed their public lands completely, even to day use. It's a different model than we've taken, and they got the same support and really a request from their local federal agencies to do that.
I have 2 questions.
Okay, yes, Jaylyn.
First of all, it would be really helpful to me personally in my business, and I'm sure to a lot of others, and maybe this already exists or it exists and it's a quick email, but if there were a graphic available similar to what the hospital puts in the paper saying, if you have these symptoms, do this, and this is how you get tested. I'd like to put that somewhere in my B&B so that people from out of town know what to do. And the other question, and that could be health department, hospital, maybe the Grand County COVID task force has something like that. I just need to find out who and where. And the other question is, I listen to public radio news podcasts, just establishing the source. And I'm hearing a lot about, of course, in the huge cities, they have to hire hundreds of thousands of contact tracers. And so, Brady, I'm just wondering if you've got plenty of contact tracers. Are you thinking of hiring more? Do you need more?
Right now, we have 4 teams trained here at the health department with the ability to add 2 more. But at the state level, there's 1,000 people trained in contact tracing whose purpose is to back up local health departments right now. And they, the last I heard, 700 of them were still available.
Jaylyn, that's a great idea on the cards, and I'll make sure that our marketing department gets those made and distributed to all of the lodging.
Thank you. That'd be helpful.
Brady, could I ask you a little more about the order itself? It's broken out into sections. We got, we kind of went back and forth in section 1 and adjusting the risk level and the health indicators and how those are still kind of vague. obviously the section 2 with the face coverings, we're kind of back and forth. I really like the idea of if you support Moab business, that you support face coverings. And it'd be, I for one would like to see a little stronger support of that in future versions of it. You already talked to section 3 with the 72-hour rest period being moved to 24 hours, but kind of the next one through was section 4, and the first sentence of section 4 is about the travel advisory. It says Southeastern Utah Health Department requests that visitors that are in Grand County on non-essential business return to their home, and non-essential visitors planning to come to Grand County reconsider their plans and remain near their homes. And to me, that kind of seemed to not jive with a lot of the other stuff that were in here. And I guess for me as a council member deciding kind of what portions of this to support and highlight, is that a strong message that we need to be getting out, that the health department is requesting visitors return home and that non-essential visitors planning to come reconsider?
Well, and that's a great question, but so it kind of echoes this idea that we are still in, we're transitioning to the orange stage, where in the guidance it talks about limit non-essential travel still. Now, it may not be prudent to shut the world down, obviously, but passing along a message that it's still best to stay close to your home. It's still best to engage in activities where you have really good control over your social distancing activities and who you're with, and knowing what their symptoms are, and you're not really placing additional burden on a community. So in one sense, that is a carryover from previous orders. In another sense, it is a reminder that we ought to think very carefully about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Okay.
I'd just like to echo on that. It's consistent with the governor's phase guidelines and the executive order.
Thanks for that.
You. Any further questions? Okay, it looks like everybody's satisfied with their, gotten the answers they want. And then, of course, we can email you or contact you if we need further information.
Thank you.
So we are ready. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your hard work and preparation that you have done during the 6 weeks to this point. Appreciate it. Thank
Amazing
you,
job.
And Warren, Ryan, if he's still on. Thank you. So we are moving to action item. Yes. Thank you. Action item D, approving Grand County and Southeastern Utah Health Department's joint amended public health order effective May 1st, 2020. Chris Baird and Brady.
Just so you're aware, we skipped the minutes. I don't know if you want to go back to the minutes or.
We had a motion and a raised hand vote on it.
Okay, I gotcha. So the order that's up for D, and Mary's having some connection problems, by the way. is the amended public health order. And just to make it clear, this order is a joint order to be signed by both the Southeastern Utah Health Department and Grand County. And so, yeah, I would think that if there are any amendments to this that anybody's interested in, that we might want to discuss that prior to a motion. Otherwise, it would be appropriate to make a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Curtis, go ahead.
I move to approve the joint amended public health order to be effective May 1st, 2020, and authorize the chair to sign all associated documents.
Second.
Motion by Curtis Wells, seconded by Jalen Hawks. Discussion?
Madam Chair,
Seeing, Evan.
I just, those guys jumped off the meeting kind of quickly, and I really do want to underscore that the health department staff has done really an amazing job. They've been forced to make some tough decisions, but their actions have been extremely beneficial to the health of our community. I do fear, like many, that we're reopening too quickly, but to Brady's point, I do recognize this is a statewide action being led by the governor. It's not really happening town by town, county by county, or even region by region. Obviously, there's a lot of political and economic pressures that they're dealing with, but many local businesses have the freedom and they will choose to stay closed longer. And that I wish there were some clear markers for success and failure in place, but really, to Dylan's point, that we're going to have to open at some point, and the threat isn't really going away. And I trust him when he says that there's no huge gains in waiting to do so. So it may not be the order that I would like to see, but I'm willing to support it, and I am very appreciative of all the work that the health department, the hospital, and county staff have put into this to get it to where it is now. I appreciate that the governor is recognizing that we have a unique situation down here and is willing to make some local amendments for our sake.
Thank you, Curtis. And I see that Brady is still on. So I think your message was heard. Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Curtis?
just real quickly, I wanted, I appreciated the opportunity to contribute to this. I want to disclose on the record that I do not own an interest in Nightly Accommodations that is impacted by this. But the group that we had to discuss how we can modify a plan, I thought was a really good group. Lane was very helpful, Zachariah, and then Orion. And we spent quite a bit of time in Zoom meetings, kind of going back and forth and massaging different things. And I think that, it's not perfect, but given the circumstances, I think there's some good balances in here in a lot of different ways. There is a lot going on out there. I mean, a lot of businesses that are still open are having a hard time getting employees to come back to work, through the entitlements and stuff that have been created. And so we're in an interesting place. But hopefully people will follow these guidelines, and hopefully we can continue to manage this and gradually phase into a reopening. The early reports from lodging has been really soft in bookings since this press release came out. And so, you know, so far there's not a huge wave that's you know, coming into Moab. Now that's likely to change, you know, after the 1st, and give that a week or two, you know, for everyone else to open up. But I will echo what Evan has said regarding everyone's work. And I just want to stress that, you know, I had some frustration about some of I felt like we could do a better job communicating on how we could reopen. And it felt like we got there at the tail end, and I was very satisfied with the quality of those deliberations. So thank you for that.
Any further discussion? I'll call for a vote. Greg Halliday? Yes. Evan Clapper?
Yes.
Rory Paxman?
Yes.
Gabriel Wojtek?
Yes.
Curtis Wells?
Yes.
Jalen Hawks?
Yes.
Mary McGann, yes. Passes unanimously. Jalen, with the issues I'm having with my connection, would you take over the chair?
Yes, I would be happy to do that, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to agenda item E, approving the extension of a state of local emergency due to infectious disease COVID-19 novel coronavirus. Chris Baird.
Yeah, so this was scheduled to be reviewed on our May 5th meeting, but we had so few agenda items that we shifted most of those over to this meeting. So that's one of those agenda items that was scheduled for May 5th. And so I've drafted it to bump it out another 30 days and reevaluate on the June 2nd. I do think that we're probably going to have to extend it at least out to the end of July because most of our furloughs and personnel policies relating to COVID-19 extend out that far. So I don't know how comfortable the council is extending this local emergency declaration out 60 days plus. But if you're comfortable with it, I'd just recommend, I think, extending it out to August, the meeting of, I'm trying to find it here, August 4th. But it's up to the council, but we do need to extend it in order to maintain all the policies that we've established, the temporary policies, personnel policies, et cetera.
So moved, Mary.
Did you want to do to what date, Rory?
You were saying August something?
August 4th?
August 4th.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion by Rory Paxman to extend the state of local emergency to August 4th, seconded by Greg Halliday. Any discussion? Seeing no one wishing to discuss it further, I will call for a vote. Evan?
Sure, yes. Yes,
Okay,
I'll go for
Curtis.
it.
Curtis. Yes. Greg? Votes yes. Mary?
Yes.
Votes yes. Rory votes yes. Oh, Rory votes yes. And Jaylyn, I vote yes. I'm missing someone. Gabe. Gabe is, okay, that motion passes 7-0. Okay, that takes us to agenda item. I need two screens for this. Agenda item F, approving the Board of Equalization's findings of fact, conclusions of law, and final decisions denying the charitable use tax exemption request made by Moab Community Rebuilds. Christina Sloan, County Attorney.
We've talked a lot about this in recent meetings, so I don't think I need to present anything, but if you guys have questions, let me know.
Do I have a motion?
Madam Vice Chair, I would like to move to approve the Board of Equalization's findings of fact, conclusions of law, and final decision denying the charitable use tax exemption request made by Community Rebuilds and authorize the chair to sign, the chair of the Board of Equalizations to sign all associated documents.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I've got Greg seconding the motion. Any discussion beyond that?
I do have a point of discussion. Chrissy, I think someplace it called out bullet 27 mentions federal government in the community rebuilds.
Oh.
Ooh, good catch.
I would move to strike that and approve the rest. Or I guess I already made a motion, but do we need a new motion? My motion was to take federal government out of bullet 27.
That's your amended motion
Ugh.
to approve?
If needed, yes.
Christina, advise, please.
I think you should amend.
Okay.
And that paragraph, just to clarify, paragraph 27 needs to stay, but we just, instead of the federal government, it should be the organization.
Great.
Okay.
I would like to make a substitute motion with the edits as mentioned by the attorney.
Okay, and Greg, you're still seconding that?
Yep.
Okay, motion by Evan, seconded by Greg. Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Evan?
Yeah.
Have some,
Oh, sorry, Mary.
before we go, it can't be in the findings because it wasn't presented, but I did call USU after our meeting, and they do earn credits through Utah State University. They just don't get it tuition free. That was all that was changed.
I'm sorry, can anybody translate that for me?
Yeah, Mary and I have talked about this. So she called USU, and the information they gave her was that students can still get credits, but they used to be free and they're no longer free. That she asked if that could be included in the decision. I said no, because it was not evidence presented by the organization. And all we can do is consider the facts that was presented to us in the hearing and in the written materials. And there's nothing in the written materials that confirms they currently get credits.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, thank you for sharing that, Mary. Roll call vote. Evan?
Yes.
And just as a reminder, we are approving the decision of the Board of Equalization's denial of the tax exempt status for the request made by Community Rebuilds as amended per county attorney. Evan?
Yes.
Curtis? He said yes. Greg? Yes.
Yep.
Mary?
No.
Okay, one no. Rory?
Yes.
And Gabe. Oh,
I recuse
Okay.
myself.
okay. One recusal. So the motion passes. Five in favor, one opposed, and one recusal. Mary opposed the motion. Gabriel recused himself. Okay, let's go to agenda item G, approving the Board of Equalization's finding of fact, conclusions of law, and final decisions denying the charitable use tax exemption request made by Friends of Arches and Canyonlands National Park. Again, Christina.
And again, I don't have further comment, but let me know if you have any questions or last minute changes.
Okay.
Jalen,
Yes, Evan.
I would like to move to approve the Board of Equalization's findings of fact, conclusions of law, and final decisions denying the charitable use tax exemption request made by Friends of Arches and Canyonlands National Parks, and authorize the chair of the Board of Equalization to sign all associated documents.
Thank you. Motion by Evan, seconded by Greg. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Evan?
Yes.
Curtis? He votes yes. Greg? Yes. Mary?
No.
Okay, we have one no. Rory
Yes.
and Gabe.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 6-1 with Councilmember McGann in opposition. Moves us to our consent agenda. Just 2 items on that. Ratifying the chair's signature. Item H, ratifying the chair's signature on a letter of support and grant signature authorization for RTP grant, which I assume is Recreational Trails Program grant.
Correct.
And item I, ratifying the chair's signature on an executive order suspending Grand County policy regarding insurance benefits for full-time employees and defining furloughed and partial furloughed status. And to
Jalen, before a motion, was there a more current version of item I to be considered?
there is, Renee emailed that to us just barely prior to the meeting. Chris, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so that most recent version is the one that has all of Jalen's corrections in it. That Renee.
Okay, do we need to
Right.
list those corrections in this meeting?
Let's see, I could if I can find them real quick. Yeah, I'm trying to run 2 computers also here.
If I may,
Yes.
oh, never mind. I thought I had it.
So I'll just go over Jalen's corrections.
Oh, yeah.
There are a couple of places where the phrase partial is used where it's actually referring to partial furlough. The first place is in the now therefore section. The next place is on the first page of the policy, second line that says partial that. And then the last comment that I have is that the policy A, subsection B, subsection 6, it reads, an employee who is in partial furlough status and works 40 hours or more will be end their partial furlough status. And the whole sentence could be fixed by adding the word week after one and deleting the word be. So I think that's what Renee did.
Yeah, she did that. I did look at that just before the meeting. Thank you, Renee. She probably isn't on, but thanks anyway. And now do I have a motion?
Right. I would move to adopt the consent agenda as discussed and authorize the chair to sign all associated documents.
Thank you. We have a motion by Evan and again a second by Greg Halliday. Any more discussion? Approving the consent agenda as discussed. I will take a vote. Roll call vote. Evan,
Yes.
Curtis. Yeah, votes yes. Greg? Votes yes. Mary?
Yes.
Rory?
Yes.
Gabe?
Aye.
And myself, I think I've been forgetting to vote. Yikes. I vote yes, and I vote yes on the last two items as well. Sorry about that. Okay, motion passes 7-0, which brings us to our discussion item. Discussion regarding Grand County's budget reductions due to coronavirus. Chris Baird and Chris Kaufman, our council administrator and our council treasurer respectively, will discuss that, lead us through that.
Okay. I don't know if Chris is on or not. Don't see him yet, but I'll start. I'm gonna try to do a screen share here and see if I can get that to work. I can get over to this graph. Can you all see a graph?
Yes,
Okay. So
I can.
these are some of the major revenue streams that are likely to be impacted by COVID-19 and lack of visitation. On the left side here, we've got the 0.25% sales tax at our regular sales and use tax. We've got restaurant tax, our two car rental taxes, and then TRT right here. Then this is our transportation tax, and these are the totals of all of these. The blue is what I calculated to be our revenue if we have no recovery this year, which would basically be taking the lowest month of revenue from 2019 and carrying that straight across through to December, after about a 60% month in March. And then the 2020 50% recovery shows some recovery in the fall, about 50% above that baseline. And that would just be from August through December. And so, and then the green is what we have budgeted. And so you can see that these sales and use taxes, they have a stronger baseline because they're fed into by the local population. And then obviously these ones that are more tourism specific, like restaurants, car rentals, and TRT, those are going to take the biggest hit because they're predominantly visitation driven. And so, as you can see with the TRT especially, we're looking at major drops in revenue, and losing, most of the spring business is really going to hurt us no matter what, even if we see some recovery in the fall. So one thing to keep in mind is that this is split between the general fund and the travel council. So the travel council and the general fund are going to, both respectively take their hit in this TRT. This is the total TRT between both general fund and the travel council. Transportation tax doesn't go to the general fund, but it does fund the B roads, the roads department, and to a degree the Grand County Active Transportation and Trails. And so I've asked those departments to make respective cuts based on projections. And these restaurant and car rental taxes all summed together are what we call TRCC. Those also feed into mitigating costs associated with tourism in our general fund. So these are going to be more or less losses that are going to be impacted relative to our general fund. TRT is going to be about half. Transportation is a couple different funds. So you can see that, with a little over $10 million budgeted, that even if we see recovery, we're going to be, a little over 4 million. So that's a pretty major loss right there between all the different funds that this is going to impact. There's some other issues that we have to take into account that are not represented here, like lower collection rates all around for property tax and sales tax. When people, run out of money, they attempt to defer or just not pay their sales and property taxes, so our collection rates go down in general. We haven't really factored that in. There's also a lot of other smaller revenue streams, like for instance, the Old Spanish Trail Arena, airport, ramp fees, fuel fees, all kinds of smaller revenue fees that I haven't factored in, but are going to also affect us. And so does anybody have any questions on these revenue projections for now before we move on to some of the expenditure cuts that have been implemented?
I just have one clarifying question. So the 50% recovery is from today moving on, or that's like if we're at 50% for the year?
No, 50% recovery starting in August and running through December.
Oh, okay.
And so it would be a recovery. If you subtract the 2019 total revenues from the baseline revenues, that lowest month, 50% of that difference added in. And I mean, I could bring up the data. It's probably too much for anybody to look at in this scenario, but this is the data that I use. And so in a lot of cases, like for instance, the baseline for TRT is virtually nothing, because without tourism, we really have very, very small revenue in those areas. But for the most part, the baseline that I established was using the lowest revenue month from 2019 to establish our baseline. We do have to understand that that lowest revenue month still includes some degree of tourism. We don't really have any months, or we didn't before COVID-19 came along, where we had zero visitors, like we had, for the last month and a half. But yeah, that's the difference between that 2019 maximum value and the baseline starting in August. That's where the 50% recovery comes in.
So Chris, on columns 1, 2, and 3 for the data sheet, are those actuals or best guess scenarios? Do we have that data yet? I know TRT comes in slowly, lots of things do. So just curious about those columns.
We might have some for January. So it's the first 2 months of the year are accrued. And so these numbers in 2019 are actual numbers taking into account the accrual. So we receipted this money, this $43,772, we receipted that in March, but I accrued it back to January because that's when we account for it. So this 2019 numbers are accrual adjusted. And so it will be similar to that. So these are actual numbers, these 2019 numbers. And then the rest of it is predicated on those actual numbers just based on my estimates. And so, yeah, I think we may at this point be able to pull in January, but that's not going to really tell us much. But we're about 2 months behind in general. When we get the money for the prior months, 2 months prior.
Okay.
We modified accrual accounting.
Okay.
Any other questions on the revenue projections? Okay, so now let me see if I can find. Oop. Okay, hold on. So I'm just trying to find that. You should all have it, but the personnel actions, I'm trying to pull up here real quick. I'm gonna have to get that out of my email now. Close it on. Maybe Chris Kaufman, are you on the line? Maybe you could go over some of your stuff while I pull up the personnel actions form. I need to read it on mine so I can project it.
Oh, that's right.
Is Chris Kaufman on? Maybe he needs a meeting. Hard to project my screen and run this at the same time.
Who's on the phone at 435-260?
Yeah, it's just I can't ask. Is it is he in the waiting room?
Huh, I don't know.
He
Oh.
sent us Chris Kaufman sent a Word document outlining his report. Has everyone seen that?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Anyway, I pulled up, can you see on this, on your screen, this COVID-19 personnel actions?
No, we're still looking at the spreadsheet, Chris.
That's in the packet, though.
Yeah.
Trying to present it for the, let me see if I can.
Look, Chris, if I get this right, we're 60% less in total revenue, right?
For those revenue streams, if I calculate it just for the general fund alone, and then include like property tax and all the other things that won't be as severely affected, I'm projecting, up to about a 30% total revenue decrease for the general fund specifically. And of course, there's going to be other impacts also to other funds. Like B Road is predominantly funded by the transportation tax, and B Road itself may be pretty significantly impacted because I think the formula for how we get paid for B Road money is partly calculated based on the price of gas. And so price of gas is plummeting. That's also going to mean that all the mineral lease revenue is going to plummet for all the service districts. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of other pretty significant reductions in revenue besides just our sales, use, and excise taxes, which I'm presenting right now.
Hey, Chris, that 30% reduction in general fund, does that include the portion of TRT that we offset general fund expenses with for mitigation?
Yes.
Okay.
As well as TRCC.
Okay.
And, it may be more extreme than that, depending on when I add up all the other smaller revenue lines that are going to get hit as well. Like for instance, OSTA, the airport, factor in a lower collection rate for both sales and use and property taxes. And so, it could certainly get even worse than that when all is said and done, or it could be better if the economy recovers better than what I'm projecting too. It's very difficult scenario to try to predict.
Chris, what is the payroll amount line item of the general fund? Where are we at now in millions of dollars specifically for payroll?
I'm not sure. I didn't calculate that in total. I would have probably done our furloughs even earlier. However, we're self-insured for unemployment. Didn't get an answer until recently whether or not we were going to be on the hook to pay the expanded unemployment benefits. And so I didn't want to be in a position when nobody could tell us whether or not we were going to end up paying more, to furlough people, which was a bit of a threat there for a while, because I think some are making actually more on unemployment than they would if they had stayed working. Although we did find out that we're not on the hook for the expanded $600 a week. And in addition, we're only going to end up paying, I think, about 50% of the normal unemployment insurance rates. And so once I found that out, then we did begin to furlough folks. Let's see if I can get this other document to come up and see if I can figure out how to share it.
Hey, Chair. This is Roy. Jaylen, do you hear me?
I'm sorry, somebody texted me that they're in the meeting by phone, so I'm trying to establish if it was Chris Kaufman or not.
I've been trying to talk with I don't know if this is the time or not, but I've been talking with the unemployment office up in Salt Lake because most of my employees were on unemployment all winter long. And so they have reached their total max on their unemployment. So they're having a hard time getting unemployment and they can't even get the $600 because of that. So I don't know if anybody else is having the same problem, but I'm about ready to lose about 10 of my employees because I can't keep them going.
So trying to see, there's somebody that I unmuted at 8775. Who's that?
That is Chris Kaufman.
All right. Okay, now that I've got this personnel actions sheet up, can y'all see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So as of now, we've got 14 full-time employees on furlough, 5 part-time employees, and the breakdowns, four in the travel council, 3 maintenance, 2 at the Old Spanish Trail Arena, 1 in the council administrator's office, 4 part-time, 1 full-time at the treasurer's office, 1 full-time at the clerk auditor's office, 2 full-time at the Grand Center, and 1 in justice court. We've got some reduced hours also happening, 2 employees so far. Let's see. Some are on FMLA leave at 2/3 rate, and sick as well, using the emergency paid sick leave policy that is mandated. Not on this sheet, we've also done a hiring freeze, which is going to probably last through the rest of this year for the sheriff's office. There's 2 corrections deputies, 2 patrol deputies, and 1 assistant food service position, which are froze. And the roads department, I believe, also has 2 full-time positions that they're going to freeze hiring on. There may be others, I'm not sure, but we did a hiring freeze also. And then at the bottom, Renee also listed some of the executive orders we passed relating to personnel policy. So anybody have any questions on
Chris, what's the FMLA?
It's family medical leave allowance. I'm not sure that I can really say exactly.
That's what I thought it was. Thanks.
Hey, Chris, do you foresee that we're going to have to raise property tax to get the rest of this back?
Well, we advertised about $1 million more in a property tax increase than what we approved, and we could still go back up to that higher amount if we wanted to. So, I mean, it's an option that we could increase property tax and collections amendment prior to June, when we have to certify the tax rate. By law, we can go all the way to advertised and truth in taxation. So it's an option, but it's not something that we've gotten to yet.
Thank you.
Hey,
Chris.
Greg. Oh, sorry. Greg, could you put mute on when you're getting ready to blow your nose?
Okay. So, Chris, well, Mary or Jalen, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the budget because we haven't had an opportunity to do so yet, or at least some projections. And we had some email dialogue that regarding like some of the concerns about the travel council that I thought Chris did a good job in outlining the facts of what's happening there. And I'd like to just take an opportunity to summarize that real quick, just for the record, because we've got a lot of mixed messaging and things like that. And I'm not going to read your email into the record word for word, Chris, but just to kind of summarize real quick, if that's all right. And so essentially it's stating that the travel council's advertising budget has not been reduced to zero. The travel council started 2020 with about $646,000 in their fund balance. The way that they spend their money in the early part of the year before we receive much TRT revenue in the spring requires about a $500,000 fund balance for cash flow purposes. Chris's projection for lost TRT go well beyond a $146,000 loss and even go beyond the full $646,000 fund balance. In order to maintain the ability to operate effectively and efficiently, we've cut costs to maintain a balance for cash flow purposes. Otherwise, we're going to be severely restricted in how we advertise. So just to finalize, the travel council money spent now can't be spent later. There's a finite amount available, hence the furloughs of the 2 travel council employees. Any lobbying or, concern about those travel council staff furloughs and concerns in regards to bringing them back on will have the opposite effect of what we're intending to do, which is to maintain our ability to recover with advertising in the fall. So I just wanted to, I think that was really a really good summary of how that department's been managed, and wanted to have that read in the record for clarity. So in addition to that, a concern that I have just up front, I know we're still early, Chris, but when I started, our general fund was just under, I think, 13 million in 2016, 2017. And our payroll was approximately 10 million, I think, roughly. And we had a lot of debates and interesting conversations about the budget in the last few years. But that one, like a point that I brought up was for our class of county, we were ranked really high for the amount of staffing and payroll, for our size of county. And the justification for that was, that's because the level of service that is required to meet the demands of the tourism economy that we have, which is, north of 4 million visitors a year, roughly. And so that's kind of been the pickle that Grant County's been in, is that these high volumes of tourists require larger payrolls than normal for a county that of our size and in regards to our property tax. So we're subsidizing essentially property taxes through TRT money is kind of been what the county's done for some time. And so as I'm getting into this, as we're moving into this circumstance, the point I want to make is if we're in a scenario where the tourism has been decimated and there's a lot of uncertainty there, as a council member, I get concerned. I have concerns of where we draw that line and workforce reduction and move into depleting reserves and talk about borrowing. And I'm really anxious to have that conversation, as a council, as you've already obviously had to go in and implement some pretty severe workforce reductions out of the gate. But that juncture where we get into how do we deal with this year's budget, and then what information do we have based on the recovery of tourism rates to adopt next year's budget, makes me uncomfortable, because as a council member, I can't justify a larger payroll line item if we're looking at really just a decimated tourism economy and activity, because that was the justification for having a larger payroll than a county our size, if I'm making sense. And so I really look forward to having those conversations with you and the board to understand where we're going to draw that line.
Yeah, and I think that we will have to discuss the duration of some of the workforce reduction, when we get a more detailed view of a budget amendment, and then a better view of how the economy will or won't recover. It may very well be that some of the positions that are furloughed are going to have to, be eliminated in the long run if it takes several years to get back to the point where we were as busy, or we are as busy as we were. It's probably going to require some positions be eliminated until we get back to that point again. But it's really difficult to say what that's going to be like. How fast are we going to bounce back? How significant is coronavirus going to be moving forward? Is it going to come back in the fall and be a big issue again next year?
I think
we don't know.
Yeah, and I think what I want to say is I think the return of revenue should dictate our level of workforce, not borrowing and depleting reserves to hopefully bridge a gap that we don't know how long that is.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that we're still on the hook for, a fair bit of unemployment insurance costs. And so, when we do these workforce reductions, there's still, pretty significant limits on how much we can actually save, at least through the duration of that unemployment insurance period. But, I think we need to just try the best we can to save as much as possible. We're only allowed to keep about 25% of our general fund revenue on reserve. And so obviously under circumstances like this, we could burn through that very easily if we don't do some really dramatic cuts. And so there's going to be a lot more to come, possibly in terms of workforce reduction and other cuts. I've discussed with the roads department about making some other big cuts on their capital projects list. I've discussed project cuts with all the departments that have capital purchases that they're budgeting to make this year. There's quite a bit of savings that can be made in reducing costs associated with planning. I think that if we just decide that we're going to go into the most basic mode of governance for this year, that we can cut a lot out. But everybody, the council, all the employees, and all the citizens across Grand County are going to have to realize that if we do that, that the level of service is going to go way down. But there's really no alternative, because the money's not going to be there.
Yeah.
And when the money runs out, that's the brick wall. And so it's a serious danger that we could literally run out of money. Burn right through our fund balance and get to the point where we can't make payroll because there's no money in the bank.
Yeah.
Serious threat. And that's something we need to, that's why, I've been very aggressive about some of these workforce reductions.
Yeah.
Chris, this is Chris Kaufman. Do you have an estimate on what the current furloughs are going to save?
Not yet. I haven't. I need to sit down and, because they're all going to be very specific to how the Department of Workforce Services appropriates the expense, or the payments to each employee. And that's kind of on a case-by-case basis. And so it's difficult to calculate that, but I'm going to start working on that. We will bear some of the costs, but not all of the costs. But when we do our budget amendment, you know, we'll pull those expenses out of the salary line item and reapportion our unemployment costs into the benefits line item or some benefits line item, you know, in each fund and rework it that way. That'll be a part of more detail.
Chris, do you look at this this set of personnel actions here as a sort of a thorough first step through all the departments? Do you imagine there being potentially another wave of these, or is it just too hard to predict, I guess?
Well, I'm trying to do as many as we possibly can right now because the stimulus provides that extra 600 a week and that ends July 31st. And so right now is the best opportunity for us to furlough employees and make sure that they're taken care of. And then also, you know, manifest the greatest savings for Grand County at the same time. So right now is the golden hour to do furloughs if we're going to do them. And so that's why I'm, you know, as soon as I got the go ahead that we weren't going to be on the hook for the full cost, I immediately started into these actions. And so, you know, it's a good place to be in right now. After the stimulus funding ends, then it's going to be a much more difficult decision because then, you know, the employees that are furloughed may be ineligible for unemployment, at least at that extended rate. I think that part of the stimulus allows for longer durations of unemployment than normal, which I think are normally 4 months, but I'm not really sure. Renee might be able to help answer those questions. I'm not sure if she's on or not. Doesn't look like it. But yeah, right now is the best time. And, you know, before I go and do any big budget amendment, I still need to close 2019. Like I say, we accrue the first quarter. And so I wasn't even really able to begin to close 2019 until April. And then coronavirus took over everything. And so we're a little bit behind on closing 2019. But once we close 2019, then I'm going to start immediately working on an amended 2020 budget. And it's going to be, you know, a pretty extensive amendment because our revenues are going to be very extensively reduced. But I know that we need to do these workforce reductions. And so, you know, regardless of working the details out, I know that we need to do this to the greatest extent possible.
So this is just a beginning on the furloughs.
It's hard to say how many we can do. I mean, I've discussed some of them with some departments, and part of the problem is that we get, like for instance, in the building inspectors department, if we furlough somebody, then that means we won't be able to do our building inspections on these big hotels, which in turn means we lose hundreds of thousands of revenue. And so in the cases where laying somebody off or furloughing somebody means that we reciprocally lose revenue, it doesn't make sense to furlough them. And so, and that's, you know, that's the same issue, like for instance, with the weeds department and several other departments that have grant funded positions. If you lay them off, you don't get the grant funding. And so it's trickier. These are the easy ones, you know, but as we move forward, I think it's going to get a little trickier to figure out who we can furlough and make it and then come out ahead, you know, but there probably will be more.
So in retrospect, I'm just curious about the self-insuring program.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite surprised to learn that was the case with Grand County. Looking at what has happened with the coronavirus thing, do you have a feel for what the wisdom in being self-insured is? How much has it saved in years past versus just paying the uninsurance premium for all the employees? Do you have a feel for that? Just curious. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I've been wondering.
I definitely want to look into it more. You know, I was only in the clerk auditor's position for one year, and so I was under the impression that it was cheaper to do it. You know, and it really took this like once in 100 year kind of event to throw us out of that. But
Right.
you know, I do want to look into it more. And obviously, had we had a crystal ball, we would not have been self-insured. But we didn't. And so, you know, we are going to kind of pay the price. But luckily, I think that, you know, our costs are reduced by 50% from what would normally be the case. And so that's good. Per unemployment insurance case, that is, not in total.
Does anybody have any more questions for Chris Baird before we ask Chris Kaufman to speak for a little bit about our options, recommendations?
I've got questions for council, but we can do that after Chris presents.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jalen. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
great. So, as Chris Baird mentioned, you know, we're staring down some pretty grim numbers here, and I wanted to make sure that we have as many tools in our toolbox as possible so that we know what our options are. And I've been researching in a number of different areas, but one of them is in borrowing. And I think I made it clear in my document here that I sent out that I share Curtis's concerns that it is not a sustainable option to borrow to cover, you know, deficits in your budget that are going to be ongoing. And so I really sort of consider it as one of your more last resort options. But to the extent that this is a one-time, somewhat limited impact to us, then there may be some borrowing that makes sense at some point. And so I wanted to make you aware of, you know, where our options are. And I think the overall idea to get to you is that the options are quite limited. In Utah, you're not allowed to go out and borrow long-term in the market to cover your general fund operating expenses, which makes sense. But I've talked with some other counties and officials there, and I've talked with some bankers to try to get a sense of what is available to us. And so when a county is needing money for their general fund budget, in general, it's to cover a short-term issue with cash flow that they're having. And so there is a tax anticipation note that you can get through a bank that will help you to bridge the gap between most commonly the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and when you receive property taxes in the later part of the year. And that's something that's done frequently and is something that we could do to get through a shorter term cash flow issue. So that is an option that's out there. The interest rates are 90% of prime. So right now that'd be somewhere around 3%. You can't do those for more than a year in general, although there may be a possibility to you know, roll one tax anticipation note into another one to extend it a little bit longer. Outside of that, banks don't have a lot of options for us, as far as I have found out in my conversations. But in looking through state code, I did come across 173630, which allows a county to make loans from one fund to another within the county. And I've currently got some calls out to try and get more clarification on this. I'm talking to the state auditor's office and to UDOT about some different areas that that this could have issues with, but the general idea is that if you've got some money sitting somewhere in another fund, that the general fund could borrow from that fund. There's a process in code for having a public hearing, for setting out the terms of the loan. It's repaid with interest that's set in the code. But the interest rate there is set at the PTIF rate in general, which right now is at 1.6%, but that's likely to drop. So from an interest rate standpoint, that could be an option that is advantageous to us. So we haven't closed 19 out, so we don't have hard numbers on exactly where our fund balances are, but we do know that there's a fair amount of money sitting in B roads for some projects that they have coming up. I did have a conversation with Bill Jackson about this, and he wasn't opposed to the idea of the general fund borrowing from the B roads if we needed to. Whether that's legally allowed, I'm still looking into. I haven't found anything that prohibits it yet. And then the idea would be, if we use some B roads money and then they came up with the time where they needed to use that money for a project, you can bond for B roads type projects, so for road construction. So that would be one way to make a loan that could cover that. So those are some options that I've seen so far. There was money in the third relief package that the federal government put out into a federal economic stabilization fund. It says that they can buy debt from local governments, but I haven't gotten anywhere in finding out who it's available to, if they've even released any of that yet. I've talked with the state treasurer, and hopefully if they find anything out, they'll pass that along. In prior major financial disasters, the federal government and state governments have sometimes come up with low interest loan programs for local governments. None of those have happened yet, but those may be out there. And then my last item here was that in the past, UAC has, when several counties have had cash flow issues and needed to do those tax anticipation notes, UAC has actually kind of gotten together several counties and offered a program where they would pool those needs together to create a more a larger amount of money that they're looking for and get a better rate in the market. So that could be another possibility that comes forward in the future. But again, I'm not saying that we're at the point where we want to borrow at all. I'm just trying to make sure that we know what options are available to us, because depending on our ability to make the kind of cuts that are needed and how quickly revenue streams return, we could be facing, cash flow issues in the near future. Any questions about what I've laid out so far, or areas that you all would like me to pursue?
No, I appreciate that. It was a lot of options for sure, and I think that it's low on our list of ways to move forward, but it's always good to be familiar with those. So I don't have any other homework for you right now at this point, but due diligence is appreciated.
Okay, there is one other thing that I'll mention, which is, there is talk about the federal government in their next relief package putting out grant funding to local governments. There was a proposal during the last round, the 3.5 that came out, to apportion money out to counties based on population. There was a spreadsheet that was on the NACO website showing that proposal. Grand County was on there for about $860,000. And so there is a possibility that there will be some just grant monies coming as a relief package for local governments. And I have been trying to lobby with other council members and with UAC for making sure that counties that are gateway communities for national parks get more consideration, or at the very least that when they apportion those monies out, that they take into consideration the economic impact that counties have experienced. I think, we're disadvantaged by a straight population model, but if economic impact is considered, that might be beneficial for us as far as how much we're likely to get out of that. I did get a call yesterday from Senator Lee's office, and they have heard that request through UAC to make those kind of considerations. And so there's at least some optimism that I feel that we may see some funding from the federal government to help us out.
Yeah, and
Great.
I also wanted to bring up the only bit of good news so far really is that Andy Solzvig and I applied for a grant for the airport and received notification that we were awarded up to $1,057,000 to help us offset the costs associated with what's going on, which is great because the TRCC funds about half of the operating cost, or maybe a third of the operating cost, and the general fund supports the other 1/2 to 2/3 of the operating cost of the airport. So that stimulus funding will go a long way in allowing us to reel that general fund and TRCC money back in and reallocate it to other places in the county. So that's good news. We still don't have any details on exactly how to seek reimbursement, but we were approved up to $1,057,000.
Nice.
Yeah, great news, and nice on the other possible grants coming down the line as well.
And so I would say that the more that anyone can lobby their representatives to take into account, the significant and unique economic impact that we're experiencing, I think the better.
Okay. Yeah, good point.
I've spoken to Curtis's office, Romney's office, and I asked UAC to send me the material that to Senator, see if it was what I sent, similar to what I sent. So, but if we, I mentioned it at the last council meeting, if someone wants to work with Chris and I think if we could spread out the, contacts and such, we could make more progress. That's all.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Chris and Chris. Any other comments, questions before we turn it over to Curtis for a minute? Curtis, you're on.
Well, I just, I'm getting a lot of emails and feedback from citizens and businesses that are really trying to drill down into what we're intending to do with what advertising monies we find ourselves with as we move into the summer and the fall. And I read that overview from Chris into the record because I think it's important for people to know the facts and the decisions have been made. But it's not Chris's job to get into the politics or the messaging. And there's still a lot of questions out there how Grand County as an organization kind of views this circumstance and what the mindset is in regards to, advertising through the Travel Council moving forward. And I think it would be, I just wanted to invite everyone to kind of weigh in on what their thoughts on that are so that we can be very transparent about our perspectives on that issue.
Sure, I could take a first stab at that. I know that in the past years, I've kind of been a proponent of redirecting some of that outreach towards more local efforts, promoting to visitors who are already coming or experiencing Moab. And I think that, a lot of that was while we figured out housing plans and, some of the rezoning in commercial districts that we've achieved. I think that looking forward with these negative impacts going from decreased tourism, I think it will be prudent to kind of pivot back towards some of that, bringing folks in, going after additional grants, those sorts of things. That being said, we still are in this orange moderate risk phase. And so, I kind of assume that these discussions we're talking about as we move into, a yellow and hopefully green phase. By the time we're in a green phase, and I'm all for, really trying to get that stimulus back into the local economy. I think that the Travel Council does a great job. I think that Elaine has a lot of things already teed up, and when the time is right, we'll be able to pull the trigger on that. And people know about Moab. I think people are. I think that we're in a unique situation in that what we do offer is a lot of outdoor focused recreation, which as people are canceling plans for summer concerts or a lot of indoor kind of group settings, we can fill a lot of that. As if people are hesitant to jump on an airplane, we'll be able to as much as we lose from international visitors who may not be coming to the States, hopefully we can recoup a lot of that from domestic travelers who are within our drive market and not necessarily looking to deal with the threats of airports and airplanes and stuff. So I don't know if that answers your question, Kurt, but I know that I, for one, have been one that, I didn't want to pump the brakes with one foot and step on the gas with another foot. And I feel like the brakes we have decelerated to the point where we can put a foot on the gas again. So when the time is right for this, yellow risk or green risk, we can move forward with that again.
So Curtis, I'm not sure I really understand what you would like to get at. Are you wanting to know if we want to advertise period again, or where is the Travel Council going to get their funding to advertise?
Well, I guess several things. I mean, I'm not trying to get at anything specifically. I think the elephant in the room is we're in a circumstance as a county and a community where we're fully reliant on tourism, for the revenue to provide our services, and the property tax base is sustained only through the majority of that through tourism-based, businesses and economies. And so, we've had a lot of planning and zoning issues and debates about TRT because it is a real thing that there is a significant portion of the community that is frustrated with the volumes of tourists and the change in the community due to the increase in tourism and the reliance on tourism. And so we're at a point now where there is a hypersensitivity from the economy that is paying the bills for the whole show, pretty much, at the city and the county level, for the whole county, that they're sensitive and they don't want to see any social or economic policy interests that are taking advantage of COVID-19. And I'm not pointing fingers, but I'm saying that communicating this about what we would like to see the travel council do once, as Evan put it, we get to a more comfortable place, I think is a really important thing, because as an organization, like, that's our business development department. That is the department that goes out and brings people to the table to eat. And so if there are concerns from that nucleus that's creating the value that we're feeding off of to provide all these services, that we may mismanage that, I want to understand that, and I think we're doing a service to talk about that. And I guess what I'm getting at is as a council, we need to have an opinion on that, and I think we owe it to the community to speak on that so that the intentions are clear.
Okay.
I believe that can I have the floor?
Yes, Mary, please.
Thank you. It's hard when I'm on the phone now. It's working better. It's a new day. What we were facing a year ago and what we're facing now is so extremely different that I am sure that the entire council is going to look at advertising very differently than we were a year ago, when we were feeling overwhelmed by the amount of tourism. We're going to want to, we've learned a lot from the past, but we're kind of back in the past where, our economy's down, where we're needing, where when we get to yellow and green, we're going to want to start advertising and, bringing our tourist economy back to life. I think that's incredibly important. I mean, Moab has always been a tourist town. Even during the uranium boom, many people came here. So maybe as a council, we need to get that message out that this is we will be looking at advertising very differently because it's a different day. It's totally changed. So how we were approaching advertising a year ago will not be how we will be approaching advertising in the future. We will be working to bring back a strong tourist economy. While at the same time, I hope we've learned our lesson that we really need to spend some more time diversifying our economy as well. So I think this is an opportunity for us to look at how can we not have all of our ducks in the same basket? How can we have it so that we have a more diverse economy? So if something goes wrong similar to this in the future, we will at least have something else to fall back on. So I don't know if that answers your question or if that's the concern. I've told the president of the chair of the travel council that, yes, we're going to have to start working to get, our economy back. So that's it. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Rory, unmute yourself.
Yes,
There you
I've
go.
got a few things I want to bring up. I've always been trying to push advertising because I can see what happens when advertising is not put out there. All you have to do is look at the ski resorts over in Colorado. So many things we could go over. I'm not going to go back to that, but advertising of economy, as you guys can see, because it's all we have. We put all of our eggs in this one basket, and I've always tried to push. We got to diversify and do different things. We cannot put all of our eggs in one basket. That grant last year that we tried to get for the travel council that to Chicago and places, we should have got that because then we could have used that money for this.
Right.
And I've always been really a little upset about that we didn't pass that. The other thing is, you know, we're talking about our budget cuts, and here we are budget cutting all of our employees, and we haven't even discussed council salaries or the council or the counties, the county attorneys, how we're hiring more. You know, we gave her a big salary raise and all these other things. And we added Chris, we gave him a bigger raise. You know, we need to get back into this. And, you know, we need to figure out what we're going to do with ours.
Thank you. Anyone else?
If I may.
Yes, Gabriel.
I guess I'll just sort of answer the prompt directly, which is that I feel that, you know, we clearly don't have a choice but to use advertising dollars to you know, to get tourism back to where it was so that we can extend the services of the county to the residents as is needed. I don't really see there being another option.
Okay. Greg, did you have any comments?
Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. I can't tell. It keeps coming and going. Well, you know, I mean, all we have to do is follow the division of TRT money. You know, there's a certain percentage that goes to advertising. You know, so I didn't really understand what the discussion was about. Were we trying to say that we were going to put more money than that into advertising, or the percentage that we would get into advertising, or what is it that we were trying to decide?
Well,
I'm still kind of vague on that.
So the stuff that I read from Chris's email is kind of an overview of where the TRT budget stands as of now. The portion that we use for mitigation, you know, can be used for mitigation. And so I get there's multiple concerns. Some of them are more overarching in general, but specifically that there's been some discussion about, you know, before this order, about kind of punting until the fall, you know, and different things of that nature. And so I guess the question comes up, and I think it has been addressed. Gabriel, Evan, you know, Mary, you know, have addressed it pretty specifically, and that there is, you know, kind of seems like a consensus and a revitalized commitment to that advertising, the value of that advertising. And as we move towards, you know, budget amendments and tough financial decisions, that's something that we're going to have to evaluate. It's not just as clear as day math problem, or, you know, as a conventional year when we have, you know, increasing TRT revenues, and, you know, tourism visitation is continuously increasing. So I think there is circumstantially, you know, a need to really drill down in that. And to Rory's point, like, I appreciate what you brought up, Rory, and that you waited your turn to bring it up. More importantly, was that when we get into time to amend the budget, like, I'm with you. I think we should have a cross-board evaluation and look at, you know, that compensation. And I think elected officials, including ourselves, should take a hard look at what we can do to lessen the blow. But I won't take up any more time. So
Okay. Thank you.
I'm good. I'm good.
Curtis. All right, thanks, Greg. And Rory, I appreciate that too, because it's been on my mind. I've gotten emails about what are you gonna do about council salaries. My response is it needs to be discussed in an overall picture with all elected officials and across the county, quite frankly. I was just doing some back of the envelope calculations and assuming that we spend about 250,000 every 2 weeks in payroll. That gives us about a $6.5 million payroll per year. And then you have to add about 40 to 45% on top of that for the benefits part of it. And if you multiply all that by 0.03 to get, what if we all took a 3% pay cut to hopefully be recouped or reinstituted next year? It's really it's like between $250,000 and $300,000. And that would, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it would help. And so I am anxious, along with Curtis, to get into those discussions and figure out what we're really going to do, roll up our sleeves and do it. As far as the travel council, the TRT question, I believe in the value of advertising. There's no question about it. I support, the travel council does a great job. They get people here. I guess where the point I would like to make is the TRT money should be treated, the funding of TRT, well, the funds that come from TRT are already a protected fund in that there is a state mandated split. And I agree with Greg, of course we have no choice but to stick with that split. And so while everyone else is suffering and struggling and trying to make ends meet, I don't agree that we should protect that fund more than it is already protected by statute. That expenditures in that fund need to be creative in, the advertising that they're able to do. Facebook, I'm not on it, but it's a terrific tool. Everybody else I know is on Facebook. Once Moab is open, I'm not saying that's how it has to be from now on. The split is protected and let's let them advertise. But for right now, while everyone else is making cuts, that would be my thought is it's a hard world for everybody. And that fund shouldn't be protected and enhanced any more than anybody else's. I hope I didn't say that too offensively. But before just a sec, Chris. But I do agree. I don't really want to borrow. I don't want to deplete the rainy day fund. I want to do cuts everywhere that we can before we even think about those options. Chris Baird.
So yeah, I just want to make it clear that the travel council is not a standalone department, and the general fund is, like I say, is in serious danger of becoming completely bankrupted or financially insolvent. So if it gets to the point where the general fund becomes insolvent, doesn't matter how much money is in the travel council's bank account, the travel council will cease to operate also, because they are dependent upon the general fund for payroll, HR, maintenance, a whole slew of different things. So, there's real world constraints associated with shifting general fund money over to advertising. You could do that, but if the general fund becomes insolvent, then it won't matter how much money is in the travel council. They won't be able to operate.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I guess what I'm getting at is it's a difference between, I think how critical is the advertising that comes from the travel council and the programs they cooperate in with the state level? How influential is that on the visitation? And I mean, if you're somebody that feels like the work and the advertising of the travel council has it is not a predominant component of the success of bringing people to Moab, then you're going to view it as just another department, that's in this with everybody. And I think that's one of the things I'm getting at is if we've established that this entire system that we built is reliant on visitation from people that come here and stay in lodging establishments or campgrounds, eat in our restaurants, so on and so forth, as an organization, it would be really short-sighted to not prioritize the development of more business to get things stimulated again, is what I'm saying. We're hearing lots of different things, and I think this is a disconnect that I see as I live my life in Grand County with a lot of constituents, is they're constantly looking at us going, are you guys on the same page? Do you guys understand how this system works? And they get frustrated sometimes for some reasons, and others are getting frustrated because the tourism is too busy. So this is a heavy issue that, it's important for us to discuss. And with all due respect, Jaylene, like a lot of your comments are, to me, sounds like a perspective of that's really marginalizing the value and the impact of what the Travel Council does for the economy. And I'm not saying not inviting an argument, but I think that's really at the central of my concern and the concern of a lot of people. And so,
Well, I would like to say
when you get into a circumstance where you're putting the Travel Council and advertising and marketing, for our only economic sector that we have on equal footing with departments that function off of the value created by that money, logically, I can't pencil it.
Okay, well, I'll be curious to see how you do want to pencil it, because I don't intend to marginalize the value of their advertising. I'm just saying that this is a really difficult situation across the board, and I'm not sure, are you saying that we should prioritize, give them more money so that they can advertise? That's where I would disagree. I would say let's all get through this together as best we can. Moab, for now, Moab is a great place to visit. Everyone loves to come here. It's going to take some time. I don't expect floods of people to come back anytime soon just because it's scary to travel.
Yeah.
But
no. All I'm saying,
have that discussion.
Yeah, right now is that I think I felt the need that it's important to establish for the community that how much we value that advertising dollar and tourism, and that we're clear as a board that we intend to support that moving forward. That's all I'm saying.
Fair enough.
I would just like to say that I think it's very imperative that we keep the office open.
That we what?
That we keep that office open.
So one of the things that I think everybody needs to realize, if I may, Jaylene, is that the Travel Council is going to have a finite amount of money to work with this year. Same with the rest of the county, and so we're going to have to be very intelligent about how we apply those resources. And so I think that a big part of the reason why the furloughs are happening right now is because there's significant closures and a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not we should be advertising, because we don't know if the reopening that we just approved is going to become overwhelming and dangerous, or whether we'll be able to at some point move past that really high risk or moderate risk category and begin to advertise. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to obviously to have spent any advertising money over the last month and a half. And moving forward, you know, we also want to be careful about it, you know, from a health perspective. And so to me, you know, like this is the point in time when we conserve our resources so that we can use them later. And that's why I said in my email, the chamber and several others that conserving resources right now and furloughing employees in the travel council right now is going to open the door for a fund, you know, for fund availability and advertising availability in the fall. If we spend all of our money right now and we get to the fall and there is no money left, then, you know, like I say, the ultimate reality and the ultimate brick wall is you run out of money and then you just can't do anything. And so it's important that we maintain our reserves, that we maintain our fund balance and use that money intelligently moving forward. It's not a good time to be spending money on advertising or to be spending money on a lot of those travel council positions. I mean, it's going to be much more effective to revitalize and reinvigorate the travel council in the fall than it is right now.
Yeah, I think preserving the ability to advertise, you know, is my interest. Chris, on the question for you back to the general budget stuff, what does the timeline look like for you, like as you work through these furloughs and these workforce reductions? Like, do you have a time frame in mind where you see the council having to come to the table to take action on the budget?
Yeah, I mean, there are some statutory timelines, and we're going to do a budget amendment. We're going to want to do it before we have to set the certified tax rate in June. And so that's kind of our big deadline for a 2020 budget amendment. And I need to close 2019 out within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then I'll have fund balances that will roll over from 2019 to 2020 that I can begin to work with and start to work on some details for a 2020 budget amendment. But it's, you know, it's going to be difficult because I'm going to have to, you know, like I'm furloughing one of my staff, which means that I'm going to have to pick up more of the load, and all this coronavirus stuff has made my job, you know, twice as hard already. And then I, you know, to save money, I'm going to have to pick up, Mallory and I are going to have to pick up, you know, and a part of the load from dropping in an employee in this office. And so it's hard for me to say, you know, like how long it's going to take me to redo a budget that took 5 months to build in the first place. You know, it's going to be a tall order and take care of everything else at the same time. And so that's kind of why I say, you know, we need to really go into a very basic mode so that we can just take care of the high priority things and really kind of bring it down to the elements of basic government. Because we're not going to have the capacity to do a lot if we go and do a major workforce reduction like we're doing.
So you know, to Councilmember Paxman's point about compensation reductions for state council members or elected officials, I mean, those aren't necessarily furloughs that come with costs. That's just a quick and direct way to save money. I mean, what's a timeline on us being able to deliberate on that and make changes like that?
Anytime you want. I mean, you don't have to do a budget amendment to make cuts. And obviously we haven't made a budget amendment at all. And we've made a lot of cuts. And that's because, you know, we don't have time to do a budget amendment to capitalize on the stimulus funding and the unemployment capacity with furloughs. And so, you know, you can reduce salaries anytime. That's all within your purview. You know, one of the kind of the things that's going to cause a lot of morale problems is that everybody who got furloughed, or not everybody, but most people who got furloughed are going to be sitting pretty well financially speaking and have to come to work. And all the people who are now going to be subject to a possible pay cut are going to be the ones that have to come to work still. And so, you know, there's going to be some issue with that the people who are essential enough to stick around and keep their job are going to be the ones that are going to get hit and penalized with a pay cut, or the people who got furloughed are in some cases maybe making even more now than they were when they were working.
Yeah, we don't want to create any imbalances like that, but where there are opportunities, to shave costs, I mean, I think we should look at them.
Well, and I think that there's a possibility, that if worst comes to worst, that it may come to some kind of across the board compensation reduction, if it gets to the point where we can't, cut any more and we can't do workforce reduction, and that may be something we have to do. I mean, it's just a grim reality. Like I say, when you run out of money, you run out of money, and you have to do something to bring yourself back into solvency. And so whatever that ends up being is what it's going to be. And that's just the grim reality of a situation like this.
Yeah.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But like I say, it's the timeline for a budget amendment is going to be whatever the timeline is and the deadline for setting the certified tax rate, because we want to get it done before then, to leave all of our options open. And so that would be, like, I think whenever it is, I think in mid-June sometime, that we would need to get a pretty decent 2020 budget amendment squared away.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? Been a good discussion. Thank you, Curtis. We have no public hearings. Any future considerations? I think we've probably covered those in budget discussions. And I've not heard of a need for closed sessions, so nobody has anything else. I would like to adjourn this meeting at 5:55 p.m. Do we need a motion? We got Greg's thumbs up. Okay. All right, thanks
Thank you,
everybody. I am leaving.